When security tried to drag a black veteran out of a glitzy VIP gala, they had no idea a four-star general was about to storm the stage and pin the nation's highest honor on his chest, silencing the room in a heartbeat. Darius Coleman, a battle-scarred Army veteran, arrived at a dazzling Washington, D.C. gala expecting a quiet night among heroes, only to face security guards determined to eject him for not belonging. But as tensions flared and whispers of bias filled the air, a shocking twist turned humiliation into glory, a moment so raw and powerful it left the elite crowd stunned. When a general stepped forward, medal in hand, the truth about courage and recognition rewrote the night. Before we dive into this powerful story of dignity standing tall against prejudice, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. If this tale of a veteran's unyielding spirit resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe to Narratives of Black Struggles for more stories exposing the raw truths of racial inequity in America. Your support keeps these narratives alive. Imagine a glittering ballroom in Washington, D.C., chandeliers casting golden light over tuxedos and gowns, the air thick with the clink of champagne glasses and the weight of military honor. Darius Coleman, a man who'd faced war's fire and life's storms, stepped in with a ticket and a quiet hope, unaware that his night was about to become a battleground of respect. Let's step into the story where it all begins. Darius Coleman's calloused hands gripped the steering wheel of his 2008 Toyota Camry, its engine humming a familiar tune as he navigated the twilight streets of Washington, D.C. on June 4, 2025. The city's monuments glowed in the distance, the Lincoln Memorial's marble pillars, the Washington Monument's sharp silhouette, a backdrop of grandeur against the Camry's worn interior, cracked dashboard, faded gray upholstery, a faint oil scent lingering from his mechanic job in Baltimore. At 45, Darius carried a quiet strength, his broad shoulders filling the driver's seat, his close-cropped hair flecked with gray, his deep brown eyes holding an intensity forged in Afghanistan's dust and tempered by years of loss. A subtle limp, a scar from a 2011 IED blast, slowed his step but not his resolve. In the back seat, a rented tuxedo hung in a plastic cover, its black polyester lapels slightly shiny, a size too big but the best he could afford after weeks of saving. Darius was headed to the Grand Regency Hotel for the annual Veterans Recognition Gala, an invitation he barely believed, a night that promised a rare escape from his daily grind. The invitation had arrived a month ago, a crisp envelope embossed with the Department of Defense seal, slipped under his Baltimore apartment door like a message from another world. Mr. Darius Coleman, it read in elegant script, you are cordially invited as our esteemed guest. No explanation, just a date, time, and dress code, black tie. Darius had turned the heavy cardstock over, his oil-stained fingers tracing the seal, half expecting a mistake. He was no VIP, just a former staff sergeant with the 82nd Airborne, 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, a Purple Heart buried in a drawer, now fixing transmissions to pay rent for him and his son, Jamal. But the ticket was real, its gold foil edges catching the light of his kitchen's flickering bulb, and the promise of a night among heroes, a break from grease-stained overalls and late utility bills, had stirred something in him. Pride, maybe, or hope, a chance to feel like the man Marissa, his late wife, had always seen. He adjusted the rearview mirror, catching the tux's plastic cover crinkling with the car's sway. In his breast pocket, a photo pressed against his chest, its edges worn from years of handling. Marissa, her braids swinging, laughing with Jamal at a Baltimore park, their son's toddler grin wide under a too-big baseball cap. Cancer had stolen her 4 years ago, leaving Darius to raise Jamal alone, now 16, a lanky kid with his mother's sharp mind and dreams of college. We're here, baby, Darius whispered to the photo, patting his pocket, his voice low, steady, a ritual that grounded him. This night was for them, Marissa's memory, Jamal's future, a moment to stand taller than the paycheck-to-paycheck life that defined his days. Darius parked a block from the Grand Regency, his Camry dwarfed by sleek BMWs and Teslas lining the street, their chrome glinting under streetlights. He stepped out, his work boots scuffing the sidewalk, the tux slung over his shoulder, the invitation clutched in his hand. The hotel loomed ahead, its marble facade glowing under floodlights, a red carpet unfurling from gold-trimmed doors like a royal welcome. Valets in crisp white vests darted between limousines, their radios crackling, while men in dress uniforms, medals clinking, escorted women in sequined gowns that shimmered like starlight. A senator, his silver hair familiar from CNN, shook hands near the entrance, cameras flashing, his smile polished. A string quartet's notes drifted on the warm breeze, Vivaldi's soft strains mingling with the chatter of onlookers behind a velvet rope. Darius's heart thumped, a mix of anticipation and unease. He wasn't used to this. Galas, chandeliers, the elite. But he'd earned his place, 12 years in the army, wounds that still ached, a life of service that no one could erase. He approached the entrance, his stride steady despite the limp, his posture erect, a habit drilled into him at Fort Bragg. The crowd parted slightly, eyes lingering on his jeans, his faded T-shirt, the scar across his jaw from a bar fight in his 20s, before the army straightened him out. A security guard, burly in a black suit, earpiece crackling, blocked his path, his badge reading Carlton. Carlton's eyes scanned Darius, boots, jeans, the tux still in its cover, and narrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "Ticket, sir?" His tone was clipped, professional but edged with suspicion, his hand extended, palm up. Darius handed over the invitation, his fingers steady, his gaze meeting Carlton's without flinching. "Darius Coleman," he said, his voice deep, calm, carrying the weight of a man who'd faced worse than a skeptical guard. "Here for the gala." Carlton squinted at the ticket, turning it over, his frown deepening as he muttered into his radio, the static crackling. "We've got a problem," he said, stepping closer, his bulk imposing, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "List says this ticket's already checked in. You sure this is yours?" The question wasn't neutral, it was an accusation, his eyes flicking to Darius's boots, the plastic-covered tux, as if piecing together a story that didn't add up. Darius's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure, a skill honed in war zones where panic meant death, in VA waiting rooms where indifference meant delays, in parent-teacher meetings where assumptions meant judgment. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice even, deliberate. "Came in the mail. I drove 3 hours from Baltimore. That's my ticket." He'd faced worse, Taliban ambushes, landlords who assumed he couldn't pay, teachers who doubted Jamal's potential, but the sting of Carlton's doubt, the assumption he didn't belong, cut deep. A familiar wound reopened in this glittering world. Carlton crossed his arms, his smirk barely hidden, his badge glinting under the floodlights. "Look, buddy, no offense," he said, his voice low, meant to dismiss, "but this ain't your crowd. VIPs only. Step aside, or we'll escort you out." A second guard, slimmer, younger, joined him, his hand hovering near a taser, his badge reading Mills. The crowd nearby turned, whispers rippling like wine through grass, some curious, some amused, their eyes boring into Darius. A woman in a sapphire gown leaned to her date, murmuring, probably a mistake, her tone dripping with condescension. A colonel in dress blues glanced over, his expression unreadable, while a young valet shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away. Darius felt the weight of their stares, a pressure he'd known his whole life, on bases where officers questioned his reports, in stores where clerks followed him, at Jamal's school where parents assumed he was trouble. Darius stood still, his calm a shield, his hands loose at his sides, his military training keeping him grounded. He thought of Marissa, her voice in his ear during their late-night talks. "Don't let him dim your light, Darius. Shine anyway." He thought of Jamal, studying under a flickering lamp, his SAT prep books stacked on a wobbly table, dreaming of a future Darius fought to secure. "Check again," Darius said, his voice firmer now, but not loud, a command wrapped in restraint. "I'm where I'm supposed to be." Carlton sucked his teeth, his hand reaching for his radio, muttering, "Possible trespasser, need backup." Mills stepped closer, his taser hand twitching, the tension thickening like smoke in the humid air. The crowd's whispers grew. "Who is he? Why's he here?" Their eyes sizing him up, dismissing him as an outsider, a glitch in their polished world. Darius didn't move, his gaze locked on Carlton's, his stillness a quiet defiance. He wasn't leaving, not after driving 3 hours, not with Marissa's photo warm against his chest, not with Jamal's future riding on his pride. Flashback, Fort Bragg, 2009. Darius, 29, stood in a briefing room, his uniform crisp despite the North Carolina heat, his squad's patrol report questioned by a white major. "You sure about these coordinates, Coleman?" the major asked, his tone implying error, not inquiry, his pen tapping the map. Darius held his gaze, his voice steady, his hands clasped behind his back. "Yes, sir. I was there. My men confirm it." The room went quiet, his squad nodding, their trust a shield. The major backed down, his eyes narrowing but conceding. That moment taught Darius, calm outlasts doubt, truth outshines bias, Presence demands respect. Back at the Grand Regency, Carlton's radio crackled, a voice confirming, no duplicate ticket. Hold him. Carlton's smirk widened, his hand raised to signal Mills, his voice cold. Last chance, buddy. Move, or we move you. Darius didn't flinch, his eyes locked on Carlton's, his body still, his heart steady. He'd faced death in Kandahar, carried men through gunfire, buried his wife, raised a son alone. A guard's sneer was nothing. He opened his mouth to speak, but a voice, deep, commanding, sharp as a blade, cut through the tension. Stand down, gentlemen. Heads turned, the crowd parting like water as a man in a crisp army dress uniform strode forward, for stars gleaming on his shoulders. General Marcus Everett, a legend whose name Darius knew from briefings and newsreels, locked eyes on him, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. The night was about to change, and the truth about Darius Coleman was about to unfold. The Grand Regency's entrance pulsed with tension, the red carpet a stark stage under the floodlights as Darius Coleman stood unmoved, his work boots rooted to the pavement, his rented tuxedo still slung over his shoulder. Carlton, the burly security guard, loomed before him, his black suit straining against his shoulders, his badge glinting, his smirk fading under the weight of General Marcus Everett's command. Stand down, gentlemen. The crowd, senators, colonels, socialites in glittering gowns, froze, their whispers hushed, their eyes darting between Darius, Carlton, and the four-star general whose presence shifted the air like a storm rolling in. Mills, the younger guard, hesitated, his hand dropping from his taser, his badge catching the light as he stepped back, uncertainty etched on his face. Darius's heart thumped, steady but quick, his calm a shield honed in war zones, his gaze flicking to Everett, a man he'd never met, but whose name carried the weight of legend. Everett strode forward, his army dress uniform impeccable, midnight blue, gold braid, for stars on his shoulders shining like beacons, his chest heavy with ribbons from Iraq, Afghanistan, and decades of service. At 62, his silver hair was cropped tight, his blue eyes sharp as a hawk's, cutting through the crowd's curiosity. His boots clicked on the pavement, each step deliberate, his posture commanding silence without effort. General Everett, sir, Carlton stammered, snapping to a semblance of attention, his radio falling silent, his earlier bravado crumbling. We've got a situation, invalid ticket, possible trespasser. His voice wavered, his eyes avoiding Everett's, his hand clutching the invitation like a lifeline. Everett raised a hand, silencing Carlton mid-sentence, his gesture as final as a gavel. I asked you to stand down, he said, his voice low, firm, carrying the authority of a man who'd led thousands through hell. He turned to Darius, his gaze softening, a flicker of recognition passing between them, though Darius couldn't place it. Mr. Coleman, correct? Everett asked, his tone calm, almost familiar, like a commander addressing a trusted soldier. Yes, sir, Darius replied, his posture straightening instinctively, his voice deep, steady, echoing his days in the 82nd Airborne. Darius Coleman, formerly staff sergeant. He met Everett's eyes, his limp barely noticeable, his hands loose but ready, the tux's plastic cover crinkling against his arm. The crowd watched, their whispers stilled, senators leaning forward, a woman in pearls clutching her clutch, a young valet wide-eyed, sensing history unfolding. Everett nodded, stepping closer, ignoring Carlton's fidgeting. You're in the right place, he said, his voice cutting through the humid air. I'll handle this. He turned to Carlton, his eyes narrowing, his tone sharpening. Your list is wrong. This man's a guest, my guest. Back off. The words landed like a whip, Carlton's face reddening, his radio slipping in his sweaty palm. Mills retreated further, his taser hand now limp, his eyes darting to the ground. The crowd's tension eased, some nodding, others murmuring, Everett knows him? A colonel in dress blues, his medals clinking, gave Darius a subtle nod, a soldier's respect. Carlton blinked, his voice faltering. Sir, protocol says. He stopped as Everett's gaze hardened, a look that had silenced generals in Pentagon war rooms. Protocol? Everett interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You're questioning a veteran's right to be here? This man served 3 tours, took shrapnel to save his squad. What's your service record, son? Carlton's mouth opened, then closed, his badge suddenly small, his authority evaporating. The crowd shifted, some looking away, others leaning closer, sensing a lesson unfolding. Darius felt the weight of Everett's words, a warmth stirring in his chest. Not pride, but recognition, a rare moment when his service wasn't just a memory, but a shield. He hadn't called Everett, hadn't known why he was here, but the general's presence changed everything. He thought of Marissa, her photo warm in his pocket, her voice urging him to stand tall. He thought of Jamal, his son's late-night study sessions, his dreams of West Point. This wasn't just about a ticket. It was about respect, a fight Darius had waged his whole life. Flashback, Kandahar, July 14, 2011. Darius, 31, led a squad through a dusty valley, Humvees rumbling under a merciless sun, the air thick with tension. Intel said the route was clear, but war lied. The IED exploded, a deafening roar flipping their lead vehicle, shrapnel tearing through Darius's leg, blood soaking his fatigues. Gunfire erupted, Taliban fighters pinning them down. Darius crawled, dragging Private Lopez to cover, his hands slick with blood, his vision blurring. He returned fire, held the line, pulled 2 more men, Wells and Carter, to safety, their screams fading as evac choppers roared in. 5 lived because of him, 2 didn't. No medals, no speeches, just a medic's nod and a long recovery. That day defined him, a scar deeper than the one in his thigh. Back at the hotel, Carlton muttered, "I'll need to call this in, sir," his hand fumbling for his radio. But Everett's gesture stopped him cold. Not a touch, just a raised palm, a commander's will. "You'll do no such thing," Everett said, his voice steel. "Mr. Coleman, walk with me." He turned, his boots clicking, and Darius followed, the guards frozen, the crowd parting like a sea. Whispers buzzed. Who is he? Why's Everett involved? As they crossed the red carpet, the quartet's music swelling, Vivaldi's notes a soft counterpoint to the tension. Darius's limp was subtle, but Everett noticed, slowing his pace, a silent acknowledgement of shared scars. The Grand Regency's lobby opened before them, a cavern of marble and gold, chandeliers casting prisms across polished floors. Men in dress uniforms, generals, admirals, colonels, mingled with women in silk, their laughter bright, their champagne glasses clinking. A massive American flag hung above, its stars catching the light, a reminder of the night's purpose, to honor service, sacrifice, valor. Darius felt out of place, his boots loud on the marble, the tux still in its cover, but Everett's presence anchored him, a beacon in this sea of privilege. "You okay, Sergeant?" Everett asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning Darius's face, reading him like a field report. They paused near a velvet rope leading to the ballroom, a security checkpoint ahead, more guards watching warily. "Yes, sir," Darius said, his voice steady, though his mind raced. "Just surprised. I don't know why I'm here." He adjusted the tux, the plastic crinkling, his other hand brushing Marissa's photo, grounding him. Everett's mouth twitched, a rare half-smile breaking his stern facade. "You'll see," he said, his tone cryptic but warm. "You've earned this night, more than most in this room." He gestured to the ballroom, its doors open, revealing tables draped in white linen, gold-rimmed plates, programs listing honorees. Darius's heart quickened, a sense of something big looming, something tied to Everett's gaze, to Kandahar's dust, to the invitation that had brought him here. They approached the checkpoint, a young guard scanning Everett's ID, saluting crisply. "General, sir," she said, then glanced at Darius, her eyes flickering to Carlton, who lingered behind, radio silent. Everett handed her Darius's ticket, his voice firm. "Mr. Coleman's with me. Clear him." She nodded, scanning the ticket, her machine beeping green, her smile tentative. "Welcome, sir," she said, stepping aside. Darius followed Everett into the ballroom, the crowd's eyes following, whispers trailing. Everett's guest. What's his story? Their curiosity await he felt, but didn't bow to. The room was a spectacle. Chandeliers dripping crystal, waiters in vests gliding with trays, a stage draped in red velvet, a podium awaiting speeches. Darius clutched the tux, his boots soft on the carpet, Marissa's photo a steady pulse against his chest. Whatever this night held, he was ready, not for glory, but for truth, for the respect he'd fought for since the day he enlisted. The Grand Regency's ballroom shimmered under chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering golden light across white linen tables, gold-rimmed plates, and the polished metals of dress uniforms. Darius Coleman sat at General Marcus Everett's table, his rented tuxedo now worn, its lapels slightly loose but dignified, the plastic cover folded in his lap. The room buzzed with the clink of champagne glasses, the murmur of senators, generals, and socialites, the string quartet's rendition of America the Beautiful, a soft undercurrent. Darius's broad shoulders filled the tux, his close-cropped hair catching the light, his scar of faint line across his jaw, his eyes deep with a quiet intensity. The photo of Marissa and Jamal pressed against his chest, grounding him in this sea of privilege, where he felt both seen and out of place. Everett sat beside him, his four-star uniform a beacon, his presence a shield against the crowd's curious stares. Darius's heart thumped, a mix of unease and anticipation, the general's cryptic words, "You've earned this night," echoing in his mind. The table was a microcosm of power. A senator, his silver hair gleaming, sipped bourbon, his eyes flicking to Darius with polite curiosity. A tech mogul in a tailored suit checked his phone, his Rolex flashing. Two colonels. Their dress blues heavy with ribbons, traded war stories, their laughter low. Darius sat straight, his hands resting on his thighs, his limp hidden under the table, his work boots swapped for rented dress shoes that pinched. The program, a glossy booklet on the table, listed honorees, Medal of Honor recipients, Distinguished Service Cross awardees, but Darius's name wasn't there. He wondered again why he'd been invited. The Veterans Honor Coalition's letter offering no clues, only a promise of recognition he didn't seek. Everett leaned over, his voice low, his blue eyes steady. "You're wondering why you're here, aren't you?" he asked, his tone warm, almost paternal, a stark contrast to his battlefield reputation. Darius nodded, his fingers brushing the program, its paper smooth under his callous skin. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice deep, steady. The invite came from the Veterans Honor Coalition, but no details. "I figured it was a mistake." He paused, his gaze meeting Everett's, searching for answers. "I'm just a mechanic now. Ain't been a soldier in years." Everett's half-smile returned, his eyes glinting with something Darius couldn't name. Respect, maybe, or memory. "No mistake," he said, sipping water, his ribbons clinking softly. "I was a colonel in 2011. Reviewed your after-action report from Kandahar, July 14th. Your name stuck with me, courage under fire, no hesitation. Paperwork got lost, but I didn't forget." He paused, his gaze intense, locking Darius in place. "Tonight's about fixing that." Darius's breath caught, his mind flashing to that day, dust choking his lungs, shrapnel burning his thigh, the screams of his squad fading as he dragged them to cover. Kandahar, 2011, a mission gone sideways, 5 men saved, 2 lost, no glory, just survival. He hadn't spoken of it in years, not to Jamal, barely to Marissa, the memories locked in a box with his Purple Heart. "Kandahar," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "That was a long time ago, sir." Everett nodded, his hand resting on the table, his West Point ring catching the light. "Not to me," he said. "Not to the men you saved." He leaned back, his eyes flicking to the stage, where a woman in a silver gown, the gala's host, adjusted the podium mic, her smile bright. "You'll understand soon," Everett said, his tone final, a commander's promise. The lights dimmed, a spotlight hitting the stage, the quartet falling silent. The host, her voice clear and warm, took the mic. "Welcome to the 2025 Veterans Recognition Gala," she said, her gown shimmering. "Tonight, we honor service, sacrifice, and valor. Our first award is the Medal of Honor, presented by General Marcus Everett." The crowd applauded, sharp and respectful, glasses clinking as they leaned forward. Darius clapped too, his hands steady, but his pulse quickened. The Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award, for gallantry beyond the call, a legend he'd read about in army manuals, heroes who'd charged bunkers, shielded comrades. He wasn't that, couldn't be. Everett stood, adjusting his uniform, his stars gleaming, and strode to the stage, his boots silent on the carpet. The crowd hushed, their eyes following, a sea of power and privilege hanging on his words. "Ladies and gentlemen," Everett began, his voice booming, filling the ballroom, "this medal goes to a man who, on July 14th, 2011, in Kandahar, risked his life to save 5 soldiers after an IED attack. Under relentless fire, he pulled his men to safety, held the line, and bore the wounds. Bureaucracy buried his story, but we uncover it tonight." The crowd leaned forward, Murmurs rippling like waves, senators whispering, colonels nodding, a woman in pearls dabbing her eyes. Darius's heart pounded, his hands clenching under the table, Everett's words sinking in. Kandahar, 2011, the day he'd thought would stay buried, now laid bare before this glittering crowd. He felt their eyes, not the skeptical stares from the entrance, but something new: curiosity, respect, awe. Everett's gaze found him, a silent command cutting through the room. "Staff Sergeant Darius Coleman," he said, his voice steady, "please join me." The words landed like a grenade, the room erupting in applause, sharp and forceful, chairs scraping as guests stood. Darius froze, his breath shallow, his mind reeling. The Medal of Honor? For him? The senator at his table nodded, his bourbon forgotten, saying, "Go, son." The mogul pocketed his phone, clapping, his Rolex glinting. The colonels stood, saluting, their eyes warm. Darius rose, his limp more pronounced under the spotlight, his tux pulling at his shoulders, and walked to the stage, each step heavy with disbelief. The crowd's applause thundered, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling in the back. Carlton and Mills, lingering by the ballroom's wall, stared, their faces pale, their earlier sneers gone. Darius climbed the stage steps, his boots soft on the velvet, Everett waiting, a blue ribbon with a gold star in his hands, its weight symbolic, eternal. "Darius Coleman," Everett said, his voice clear, resonant, "for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your life, I present you the Medal of Honor." He pinned it to Darius's tux, the ribbon cool against his chest, the star heavy, real. The crowd surged to their feet, the applause a tidal wave, some shouting, others wiping tears. Darius's eyes burned, but he held steady, saluting Everett, his hand crisp, his heart full. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, his voice cracking, thinking of Marissa, Jamal, the men he'd saved, Lopez, Wells, Carter, Thompson, Reed. Flashback, Kandahar, 2011. The IED's blast shook the earth, flipping the Humvee like a toy, shrapnel tearing Darius's thigh, blood pooling in his boot. Gunfire cracked, Taliban fighters closing in, his squad pinned. Lopez screamed, his leg trapped, Wells dazed, bleeding. Darius moved, instinct overriding pain, dragging Lopez to a ditch, then Wells, bullets kicking up dust. He fired his M4, held the line, pulled Carter and Thompson to cover, Reed limping behind. 5 lived, their eyes on him, their trust his anchor. 2 didn't, Simmons and Patel, their names carved in his memory. The medevac's roar was his salvation, but the scars, physical, emotional, never faded. Everett saluted back, his eyes softening, a soldier's bond unspoken. "Well deserved, Sergeant," he said, stepping aside, gesturing to the mic. The crowd waited, their applause fading, their eyes locked on Darius, a man they doubted now their hero. Darius stepped forward, his limbs subtle, his tux pulling, Marissa's photo warm, the Medal of Honor a weight he'd carry forever. The Grand Regency's ballroom thundered with applause, chandeliers casting golden light across Darius Coleman's tuxedo, the Medal of Honor pinned to his chest, its gold star gleaming like a beacon. The crowd stood, their ovation a tidal wave, senators, generals, socialites, their hands clapping, some shouting, others wiping tears, their earlier whispers of doubt now buried under awe. Darius stood on the stage, his broad shoulders squared, his scar a faint line across his jaw, his deep brown eyes burning with a quiet pride he hadn't felt in years. General Marcus Everett stepped back, saluting, his 4-star uniform a silent endorsement, his half-smile a nod of respect. Darius's heart pounded, the ribbon's weight heavy but grounding, Marissa's photo warm in his pocket, Jamal's face flashing in his mind. The Medal of Honor for him, a mechanic, a father, a soldier who'd thought his war was forgotten, was real, its truth reshaping the room, the night, his life. The host, her silver gown shimmering, gestured to the mic, her voice warm. "Mr. Coleman, please share a few words." The crowd hushed, chairs scraping as they sat, their eyes locked on Darius, a man they doubted at the entrance now their hero. Darius stepped forward, his limbs subtle, his rented dress shoes pinching, the tux pulling at his shoulders. He adjusted the mic, its metal cool under his calloused fingers, and took a breath, his voice deep, steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. I don't have words for this," he began, his tone raw, unpolished, every syllable carrying Kandahar's dust, Baltimore's grit. "I served for my brothers, my family, my country. This medal's for them, for the men I brought home, for my wife, Marissa, who kept me whole, for my son, Jamal, who keeps me going." He paused, his throat tight, the crowd leaning forward, some nodding, others dabbing eyes. I did my job, same as any soldier. Never thought it'd lead here. Thank you. Simple, honest, real. The room erupted again, applause shaking the chandeliers, guests standing, their respect a force Darius felt in his bones. Everett clapped his shoulder, his grip firm, his voice low. Well said, Sergeant. They left the stage, the crowd still cheering, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling. Darius's table, senator, mogul, colonels, stood as he returned, their hands extended. The senator, his bourbon forgotten, shook Darius's hand, his voice gruff. Damn fine work, Coleman. The mogul, his Rolex glinting, nodded, saying, inspiring, truly. The colonel saluted, their eyes warm, a soldier's bond unspoken. Darius nodded, his tux pulling, the metal's weight grounding him, Marissa's photo a pulse against his chest. The gala resumed, waiters gliding with trays of salmon and wine, the quartet striking up Sweet Georgia Brown, its notes bright. Guests approached Darius, their hands outstretched, their words earnest, generals sharing war stories, a congresswoman thanking him, a young Marine asking for a selfie, his eyes wide. Darius obliged, his grin easy but his mind racing. He wasn't used to this, praise, attention, a room full of power seeing him, really seeing him. Carlton and Mills, the guards who'd tried to eject him, lingered by the wall, their faces pale, their badges small, their earlier sneers a bitter memory. A woman in a green dress, mid-50s, approached, her eyes bright, her handshake firm. Mr. Coleman, I'm Lisa Harper, Veterans Honor Coalition, she said, her voice warm. We found your report in old Pentagon files, pushed for this. You're a hero. Darius shook his head, his voice low. Ma'am, I just did my job. Harper smiled, her eyes glistening. No, you did more. Thank you. She handed him a card, her organization's logo embossed, and walked away, her heels clicking, leaving Darius with a warmth he hadn't felt since Marissa's last hug. Flashback, Baltimore, 2012. Darius sat in a VA hospital, his leg bandaged, Marissa at his side, her braids tucked under a scarf, her hand squeezing his. The doctor warned of a permanent limp, but Marissa's voice was fierce. You walk through fire for those boys, Darius. You'll walk for me. They rebuilt together, Darius fixing cars, Marissa teaching Jamal to read, their nights filled with laughter despite the bills. When cancer struck, Marissa fought, her smile never fading, her last words to Darius, keep shining, love. He promised, his tears falling, and carried that promise through every late shift, every school meeting, every day without her. The gala's energy shifted, speeches continuing, awards for valor, service, sacrifice. Darius listened, his hands resting on the table, the medal's ribbon cool against his chest. A young woman, a Navy lieutenant, received a Silver Star, her voice steady as she spoke of Fallujah. A Vietnam vet, his wheelchair gleaming, accepted a Bronze Star, his eyes misty. Darius clapped, his respect deep, but his mind wandered to Kandahar, to Marissa, to Jamal studying under a flickering lamp. The medal wasn't just for him, it was for them, for the men he'd saved, the wife who'd saved him, the son who gave him purpose. Everett leaned over, his voice low, his West Point ring catching the light. You're feeling it, aren't you? He asked, his eyes reading Darius's silence. The weight. Not the medal, the responsibility. Darius nodded, his fingers brushing the ribbon, its silk smooth. Yes, sir, he said. Didn't expect this. Don't know if I'm ready. Everett's half-smile returned, his voice firm. You've been ready since Kandahar. This just makes it official. A reporter, a young man with a notepad, approached, his press badge swaying. Mr. Coleman, a word for the Washington Post? Darius hesitated, then nodded, his voice steady. I'm honored, he said, but this ain't about me. It's about my squad, my family, every soldier who did their job. The reporter scribbled, his eyes bright, his questions gentle but probing. What's next for you? He asked. Darius glanced at Everett, then the crowd, his voice firm. Keep working, keep raising my boy. Maybe help other vets if I can. The reporter nodded, his pen flying, Darius's words a spark for tomorrow's headlines. The gala wound down, guests mingling, the quartet playing My Country, 'Tis of Thee. Darius stood, his limbs subtle, his tux pulling, the medal a quiet weight. Everett walked with him to the lobby, the crowd's eyes following, their respect a force he felt but didn't seek. You did good tonight, Everett said, his voice warm. But this is just the start. You're a leader, Coleman. Don't forget it. Darius nodded, his hand brushing Marissa's photo, his heart full. The night wasn't over, But the truth was clear. He'd earned his place, not just here, but in a world that needed his light. Darius Coleman stood outside the Grand Regency Hotel, the night air cool against his face, the Medal of Honor pinned to his tuxedo, its gold star catching the streetlight's glow. The Gala's hum faded behind him, chandeliers dimming, guests drifting to limousines, the quartet's final notes lingering like a memory. General Marcus Everett joined him, his four-star uniform a quiet presence, his hands in pockets, his eyes on the D.C. skyline, the Capitol's dome a faint curve against the stars. Darius's rented dress shoes pinched, his limp subtle but present, the tux pulling at his shoulders, Marissa's photo warm in his pocket. The crowd's applause, the weight of the medal, the truth of Kandahar unveiled. It all swirled in his mind, a storm of pride, disbelief, and purpose. June 4th, 2025, had changed him, not by erasing his struggles, but by proving his worth to a world that had too often looked away. "You're a quiet man, Coleman," Everett said, his voice low, his West Point ring glinting as he adjusted his cap. "But your actions scream." He turned, his blue eyes sharp, reading Darius like a field report, a soldier's bond unspoken. Darius managed a half-smile, his hand brushing the medal's ribbon, its silk cool under his fingers. "Learned in the army, sir," he said, his voice deep, steady. "Noise don't win wars, deeds do." He thought of Kandahar, of dragging Lopez through dust, of Marissa's laughter, of Jamal's late-night study sessions. His life was deeds, not words, a truth the medal now made public. Everett nodded, his gaze drifting to the skyline, the monuments glowing like sentinels. "True," he said. "What's next for you?" "Back to the garage." His tone was casual, but his eyes were probing, sensing the shift in Darius, the spark of possibility the medal had ignited. Darius paused, his eyes on the street, a taxi's horn cutting the quiet. He thought of Baltimore, his cramped apartment, the garage's oil stains, Jamal's SAT prep books. "Keep working, sir," he said, his voice steady. "My boy's 16, college-bound." This, he touched the medal, its star heavy, changes things. Maybe a better job, a new start. He hesitated, then added, "Want to help other vets, if I can. They're struggling, same as me." Everett pulled a card from his pocket, its Pentagon logo crisp, his name embossed. "Call me," he said, handing it to Darius, his grip firm. "I've got contacts, defense firms, nonprofits, vet programs. You've got leadership, courage. Don't waste it." Darius took the card, its edges sharp, a door to a future he hadn't dared imagine. He nodded, his heart quickening, Marissa's voice in his ear. "Shine, Darius." The drive home was quiet, the Camry's hum a comfort, the D.C. skyline fading in the rearview. Darius stopped at a gas station, the neon lights harsh, his tux drawing stares from a cashier. He bought a coffee, black, its heat warming his hands, and sat in the car, the medal on the passenger seat, Marissa's photo in his lap. He traced her face, her braids, Jamal's toddler grin, his throat tight. "We did it, baby," he whispered, his voice cracking, the night's weight settling. Carlton's sneer, Everett's salute, the crowd's applause. Baltimore's streets welcomed him, their grit familiar, boarded shops, cracked sidewalks, kids playing under streetlights. His apartment, a second-floor walk-up, smelled of fried onions and mildew, its walls peeling, its furniture worn. Jamal waited at the door, his lanky frame filling the frame, his eyes wide. "Dad, you're on TV," he shouted, his voice breaking, his phone showing a CNN clip. "Black veteran honored after near ejection." "A medal? For real?" Darius hugged him, the medal between them, its ribbon cool, Jamal's arms fierce. "For real, son," Darius said, his grin wide, his heart full. Over pizza, the box greasy on the table, Darius told the story. Not Carlton's cruelty, but Everett's stand, the medal's weight, the crowd's shift. "They saw me, Jamal," he said, his voice low, his eyes on his son's. "Really saw me." Jamal grinned, his braces glinting, his voice eager. "Mom always did." He pulled up X, posts trending. Hashtag Darius Coleman, hashtag Medal of Honor, clips of his speech, photos of the medal. "You're famous, Dad," he said, laughing, but his eyes held awe, a son seeing his father anew. Flashback, Baltimore, 2017. Marissa, weak from chemo, sat with Jamal, 8, reading The Lion King, her voice soft. Darius watched, his garage shift forgotten, his hands oil-stained. "You're my hero, Darius," Marissa whispered later, her hand in his. Jamal's, too. He'd promised to be that hero, through her funeral, through Jamal's tears, through nights when bills piled high. The medal, now on the table, was proof he'd kept that promise. Darius called Everett's contact the next week, a defense firm offering a role training vets for logistics jobs, triple his garage pay. He accepted, his voice steady, his limp fading as he walked to the interview, the medal in his pocket, a talisman. The firm's CEO, a former Marine, shook his hand, saying, "We need men like you." Darius nodded, his heart light. Jamal's college fund now real, Marissa's dreams alive. News spread, headlines in the Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, veteran honored after discrimination scandal. The Grand Regency retrained its security, Carlton and Mills reassigned, their actions a footnote to Darius's glory. Darius spoke at vet centers, his tux swapped for a suit, his voice steady, sharing his story, urging others to keep fighting. Jamal applied to West Point, his essay about his father's medal-earning nods from admissions. In Baltimore, Darius's story lingered, a mechanic turned hero, a father who shone. He didn't shout his victory, didn't need to. The medal hung in a case, its star catching the apartment's dim light, a beacon for Jamal, for vets, for a community that saw itself in his grit. Darius Coleman was more than a hero. He was proof that worth isn't a ticket, a tux, or a title. It's the fire you carry when the world tries to turn you away. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to know what true strength looks like. Join us at Narratives of Black Struggles for more stories that shine a light on resilience and justice.